All right, so we're diving deep into Ember's Rebirth today, going chapter by chapter through this fantasy novel. We've got a whole stack of chapters to get through, 28 of them to be exact. So from the start, we're seeing quite the journey ahead. You mentioned some pretty interesting things about that explosive beginning.
Yeah. It really throws you right into the action, doesn't it? Waking up in a crater, fire everywhere, talk about an entrance. And just that name, Viova, immediately tells you this is someone to watch out for. There's going to be some serious conflict there.
Oh, for sure. A fantastic hook. And I loved what you said about those scales, those hints of something else right there under the ash. Immediately makes you wonder what Azural really is. Definitely keeps you reading to find out more.
Absolutely. That sense of mystery is so important in those early chapters. It's like we're figuring things out right alongside Azural. We're disoriented right along with her, picking up those little bits of information.
And chapters 1 and 2, guys, they do such a good job of painting that picture of the forest. This desolate, kind of creepy forest, almost like another character, menacing, oppressive, those twisted trees, the ash everywhere, always feeling like something's watching. It's really unsettling.
You can tell the author really knows how to use sensory details to make you feel that. It's like you're right there, tasting the ash, feeling that heavy air, the prickling sensation of being watched. It's seriously immersive. You're not just reading it, you're experiencing it.
And then bam, the Shadowcat attack. Such a great way to show us how dangerous this world is. And, even though she's weak, Azural still fights back.
Exactly. And even without her memories, she just instinctively uses that blue fire to fight back. Talk about a visual. It definitely sticks with you, doesn't it? It really sets her apart, marks her as different, powerful even.
Absolutely. So then we meet Talvar and Soraya in chapters 3 through 5. The dynamic shifts, right? Talvar, this cautious knight, and Soraya, the mysterious enchantress. They see Azural's situation in such different ways.
It's so interesting, right? They each have their own approach to survival, knowledge, all of it. Talvar is very practical, focused on what's right in front of him. But Soraya, well, she's got that mystical knowledge. Like, she understands something deeper, something bigger is going on. So their interactions with Azural create this fantastic tension. Who do you trust? What path should she follow? It keeps you guessing.
And then there's the Grove of Echoes, this beautiful, eerie place that gives Azural those glimpses into her past. I have to admit, those fragmented memories just sucked me in, especially that battlefield vision. Wow.
It's more than just a way to fill in the blanks, though. The grove, it's like a symbol, A symbol for Azural's broken memory, her lost identity. And the author uses those echoes to slowly, carefully reveal her story. Just brilliant. You just got to know more. And so does Azural, of course.
Chapters 6 through 11 really pick up the pace, huh? More action, Viova's followers attacking. And you start to see Azural becoming something more than just someone seeking revenge.
Yeah, it's like a transition. It goes from personal to, well, political almost.
Yeah.
Her search for answers starts to get tied up with all these other people suffering under Viova. It definitely raises the stakes. Her fight isn't just her own anymore. It's about everyone silenced by fear.
She definitely steps up, though. The way she inspires those villagers, becoming this symbol of hope. It's powerful. It has a whole new dimension to her, for sure.
Exactly. She's not just this one-dimensional character, She grows, faces challenges, and changes. The anger, the confusion from those early chapters, it starts to shift. You see purpose, leadership even. It's what makes her journey so fascinating.
And we learn more about Viova. Fear, that's his weapon of choice, which makes Azural and her defiance, that fire, even more important, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. That idea of fear, it's woven into everything. It's not just about Azural. It affects the whole society. It makes her rebellion even more important. This isn't just survival anymore. This is about something much bigger.
And then, the attack on Viova's mountain temple in chapters 12 through 15.5. That's got to be one of the most important parts, wouldn't you say? We see just how powerful Azural's fire is, and the trust she's built with her allies.
It's a huge victory. It dismantles Viova's power. It shows how strong the resistance has become. Yeah, it's thrilling, but it's also a turning point. With Viova weakened, the story shifts. We start to see conflict within the group itself, a whole new layer of tension, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. And that's where the spy comes in, planting seeds of doubt, playing on their fears and insecurities. Makes you question everything. Can Azural really stay in control?
It's such a clever move. Raises the stakes without needing some big external threat. Makes you wonder who to trust. Highlights how fragile even the strongest alliances can be. And it shows Viova, even weak, can still influence things from the shadows. Pretty chilling.
Chapters 16 to 20 take a really dark turn. We meet Malachar, this powerful figure from Viova's past. He captures Azural, And that reveal about his connection to Soraya, wow, what a twist.
Talk about upping the tension. Malakar's a whole different kind of threat. He knows Azural's past. He can exploit her weaknesses. And the fact that he's connected to Soraya, well, that just adds a whole other layer of complexity. She's forced to confront her own past, her loyalties, everything.
The magic he uses, it's brutal. Definitely reminds you that the darkness is still out there.
Yes.
Even with the temple destroyed. The way he tries to break her, to manipulate her, it's just, well, disturbing.
It shows that defeating evil isn't as easy as just destroying something physical. The fight for control, for freedom, it's never really over. Even victories can be fragile.
Their escape leads them to the Guardians of Lore. These ancient beings, they almost feel mythical, like the story is getting bigger, moving beyond this immediate fight to something much grander.
The Guardians, they introduce this whole idea of prophecy and destiny. It suggests that Azural's journey is part of something much bigger. Her fight, it's not just personal. It could determine the fate of the world.
Definitely takes things to a whole new level. And that's where we'll pause for now. But believe me, we're just getting started. Those final chapters are going to be amazing.
Oh, I can't wait. So we left off with Azural and her allies heading towards the forges of Eldara, remember? This mysterious place full of ancient power. The Guardians of Lore definitely pointed them in that direction. It felt like we were entering a whole new part of the story.
Yeah, definitely. It's like things shifted. Azural's personal quest, it's becoming something much bigger. Those Guardians, they really made an impact.
Oh, they did. And that feeling, that sense of things expanding, it carries through in chapters 21 through 28. The Forges of Eldara, they're more than just a place, really. They're like a test, a crucible almost. This is where Azural's going to be pushed, forced to confront her true potential.
And the imagery in these chapters, it's incredible. The forges, the trials, facing that shadow of Yova, it's all so vivid you can practically see it happening, like a movie.
You're right. The author really knows how to create a setting that pulls you in. And the forges, they're the perfect example. But it's not just about spectacle. Those trials Azural goes through, they reflect her inner struggles, She's not just fighting enemies out there. She's battling her own doubts and fears, forging her own destiny.
It's that classic hero's journey, but with so much depth. You really feel for her. Azural's not just following some predetermined path. She's making choices, really wrestling with the consequences of her power.
Exactly. And the author doesn't shy away from the weight of those choices. That whole idea of destiny versus free will, it's so well done. Azural learns about the prophecy, but she still chooses her own path. She takes responsibility for her power.
That final battle with the Shadow of Yova, man, it's intense. The action is incredible, and the stakes, they couldn't be higher. And then that twist with Azural transforming, it's like she's going beyond what she was, becoming something new entirely.
It's the culmination of everything she's been through, wouldn't you say? A battle on every level, physical, emotional, spiritual even. And that ending with her evolution, it leaves you with a sense of wonder. A feeling that this is just the beginning, a victory for sure, but also a new start.
It's an ending that ties things up, but also leaves you wanting more. Yova's defeated, but then there's this hint of change in Azural. It definitely makes you wonder what happens next.
It's that classic hook. Keeps you thinking about the story long after you've finished it. And speaking of finishing the book, let's talk a bit about the author's style. What did you think of the writing itself, the overall tone?
Oh, it's definitely engaging. The language is vivid. The author uses such strong verbs, and the descriptions, those details, they really paint a picture. You feel the heat of the flames, you smell the ash, you hear the wind through those creepy trees. You're right there in the world.
I agree. Those sensory details are a real strength. Even with the fantastical elements, it feels real, tangible. And the pacing overall, it's well done. Those quiet moments mixed with those bursts of action and suspense, it keeps you hooked.
There were a few parts, especially around the middle, where the pacing felt a little slow. Some of those scenes with the villagers, while important for the world building and character development, they could have been a bit tighter, just to keep things moving.
I get what you mean. Sometimes a little streamlining can help the story flow better. But overall, the author does a great job with the pacing, knowing when to slow down, let those emotional moments sink in, and when to speed things up to keep you on the edge of your seat.
What about the symbolism? I thought the Grove of Echoes was brilliant. It wasn't just a place. It was a representation of Azural's lost memory, her whole journey to find herself.
Yeah, the Grove is a great example of how the author uses symbolism. It's not just a cool setting. It's tied to Azural's internal struggles. And the way those echoes become clearer as her memories return. It's subtle, but really effective, connecting her inner and outer journeys.
So were there any parts where you thought the story could be even stronger? Any areas for improvement?
The world building is impressive, but sometimes I wanted a bit more depth, especially with the magic system. The author hints at it, but it's never fully explained. It would have been great to understand the mechanics of magic better, the limitations, the consequences. It would have made things even more interesting, added another layer of complexity.
Makes sense. And while I loved the main characters, I felt like some of the secondary characters could have been fleshed out a bit more. Giving them more depth would have added to the emotional impact.
Definitely. Giving those supporting characters more agency, more backstory, it could have made the world feel even richer.
So overall, we're both pretty impressed with Ember's Rebirth.
Oh, absolutely. It's a well-written fantasy novel with a great protagonist, vivid world building, and it really makes you think about things like destiny, free will, and hope. Sure, there's always room for improvement, but the author clearly knows how to tell a story. You can feel the passion for the genre.
So we've really dug deep into Ember's Rebirth.
Uh-huh.
From that crazy beginning to the ending that really gets you thinking. It's a story that sticks with you, that's for sure.
It does, and I think a big reason for that is how well the author writes the characters. Yeah, you've got the action, the amazing world, but it's the characters that really make you feel something.
Absolutely. Azural trying to figure out who she is. Talvar going from being all suspicious to completely loyal. Soraya's struggle with her past. That's what takes this story beyond just a typical fantasy adventure.
Right. The author's so good at connecting those personal stories with the bigger picture. You're invested in these characters. You feel their wins and losses because you understand what it means for them, deep down.
And it's not just the main characters either. Even those secondary characters, yeah, maybe they could be developed a little more, but even they have those moments that tug at your heartstrings. Like those villagers, the ones who support Azural, or the spy, the one wrestling with his loyalty.
Right. Those little stories, those glimpses into lives affected by Viova, it just adds another layer of humanity to the world. It's like a reminder that even in a fantasy world, it's those connections between people that really matter.
Speaking of Viova, he was a great villain, wasn't he? He's not just some evil bad guy. He's complex. He represents a really insidious kind of power, the kind that feels all too real.
Absolutely. Viova, he's all about fear and manipulation. He takes people's doubts, their insecurities, and uses them against each other. It's subtle, but so effective. Makes Azural's fight even more heroic, I think.
We talked earlier about how you thought the world building could use a bit more depth, especially with the magic system. What would you suggest the author does differently there?
Well, for starters, more consistency with how magic works. There are hints of rules, limitations, but they're not always clear. It would be great to see a more defined system, with its own logic, its own consequences. That would add to the mystery, but also make the stakes higher for those using magic.
It's like setting up rules for a game, right? Rules allow for creativity, strategy, but also make sure actions have real weight.
Exactly. And I think that applies to the plot, too. The overall story flows well, but sometimes things feel a little too convenient, like the solutions just appear out of nowhere.
You're thinking of those times when Soraya suddenly has exactly what Azural needs.
Right. It moves things along, but it feels a little forced sometimes. It would be great if the author trusted the reader more, let challenges and solutions unfold more naturally. It would add to the realism, even in a fantasy world.
And so for those listening, those who've journeyed through all these chapters, what would you say are the big takeaways from Ember's Rebirth?
Transformation, that's the key word. It's about Azural finding herself, accepting her power. But it's also about hope. About resisting tyranny, even when things seem impossible. It's a story that says, even in the darkest times, even a tiny spark can change everything.
Well said. It's definitely a story for anyone who's ever felt lost, unsure of themselves, anyone who's faced challenges that seem too big to overcome.
It reminds us we all have the potential to be heroes, to make a difference, even if it starts with a small act of defiance. A spark of hope that lights a fire in ourselves and others.
We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into Ember's Rebirth. It's a story with a lot to say about identity, power, and the choices we make when things get tough.
And as always, keep exploring. Find those stories that challenge you, inspire you, keep that curiosity alive. Thanks for joining us.